Ever get that feeling where you're like, man, I just wish there was a foolproof, guaranteed way to get this right? You know, like if you're following a recipe and you just know it's going to turn out perfect every
Right.
time.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Well, in the world of pharmaceuticals and dietary supplements, that desire for a guaranteed win, it isn't just a preference, it's the rule.
It is. It's absolutely the rule. And that really leads us to our topic for this deep dive. We're talking about standard operating procedures, SOPs. They're basically the super detailed recipes of the pharma and supplement world, the essential blueprints, if you will, for good manufacturing practices,
Right.
GMP.
Exactly. That's a really good way to put it. I mean, we've been going through a ton of information, getting ready for this. We've looked at official regulations, industry guides, expert opinions, all sorts of stuff to really figure out why these SOPs are so crucial. You know, they're important for making sure that the medicines and supplements we all rely on are safe and high quality. So we're going to explore what exactly SOPs are, why they're basically non-negotiable under GMP, and how they're developed, reviewed, updated, basically their whole life cycle.
And this is really important now because the industry is under a lot of pressure to innovate and be as efficient as possible, especially with things like personalized medicine and these really complex biologics coming into play. But at the same time, we can never compromise on quality and safety. And that's where SOPs really come in because they're kind of the bedrock for companies to navigate those demands successfully.
Absolutely. So let's get right down to it. What exactly is an SOP?
Well, picture this. You're doing a very specific task. Let's say you're calibrating some lab equipment or maybe cleaning a manufacturing area. An SOP is a document. It tells you step by step how to perform that task correctly and consistently every single time. So it's like this super detailed written guide that aims for uniformity. You get reliability and ultimately the highest quality and integrity in every process.
So it's like no matter who's doing the work, if they follow that same SOP, the outcome should theoretically be the same.
Exactly, that's the idea.
Yeah.
And in the GMP world, there's this saying, if it wasn't documented, it wasn't done.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that.
So think of it this way. If you can't show a clear record of how you did something, how you performed a task, and that it was done according to a set procedure, then from a regulatory standpoint, it's like it never even happened. And that's why it's so important to have these well-defined SOPs and to follow good documentation practices, GDP.
That really emphasizes how important it is to write things down and have that paper trail. But why is that documentation so crucial for a quality system?
Well, it's kind of the backbone of a quality system, you know. You have to have proper documentation. It has to be accurate, complete, up-to-date, and consistent. That way, all the critical information is there. You know it has integrity, it can be traced if you need to, it's controlled, and it's kept for as long as you need it.
Right.
And if there's ever a problem, you need to be able to go back and see what happened, especially the relevant SOPs and the records that show they were actually followed. Those are crucial for understanding what went wrong and figuring out how to fix it so it doesn't happen again.
I see. So it's all about traceability and accountability.
Yeah, you got it.
Now, GMP hasn't always been around, has it? How did SOPs become such an integral part of these regulations?
Well, the GMP regulations, they've actually evolved over time, and a lot of that has been in direct response to incidents that showed the need for better controls and safeguards.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, a big example of that is the thalidomide tragedy.
Oh, right.
You know, that event sadly showed just how devastating the consequences can be if you have inadequate testing and oversight for drug safety.
Yep.
So it was a real turning point. It led to stricter regulations all over the world. And SOPs, they really came to the forefront as a crucial tool for establishing and maintaining those safety standards. It's about codifying what we've learned from mistakes so we don't repeat them.
So they're kind of like a formalization of best practices. And that's driven by this huge need for safety.
That's exactly right. And when we look at the 5 key elements of GMP, people, premises, processes, products, and procedures, SOPs fit right in there under procedures.
Okay.
But they're also connected to all the other aspects.
Right, they're intertwined.
Yeah, for example, you'll have SOPs that tell you how personnel are trained, that's people. You have SOPs for how facilities are cleaned and maintained, that's premises. And of course, you have SOPs with step-by-step instructions for making the product, which is processes.
So it's not just about the final product that we see, right? Even stuff that happens behind the scenes in a lab setting that needs SOPs too.
Oh, absolutely. Whether it's a manufacturing floor or a lab, you need SOPs to minimize the risk of things getting contaminated or mixed up. In a lab, even if a test sample isn't meant for consumers, if you don't have standardized procedures, you can get errors in your testing and analysis,
Right.
and that can have a huge impact on the overall quality assessment of a product. It's like having a shaky foundation. It weakens the whole structure.
I see. So everything's connected. Now, we've talked about why SOPs are so important, but what does a typical SOP actually look like? What are the main sections you usually find?
Well, based on what we've learned from the folks at ESS Consulting Group, a good SOP usually has several key parts.
Okay.
It'll often start by referencing other relevant SOPs, any forms you need to use as part of that procedure.
Right.
This interconnectedness is important because it makes sure that the SOP isn't isolated. It fits into the whole quality system.
So it's kind of like a web of instructions where each part is linked to other parts.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It prevents things from being siloed and ensures everyone's working together towards quality.
I like that.
Then you have a section on definitions.
Mm-hmm.
So if there are any terms that could be understood in different ways, you define them clearly to avoid any confusion.
Makes sense.
And then, a really important section, responsibilities. This lays out exactly who is accountable for each step of the procedure.
Okay.
This is crucial because it prevents any uncertainty about who's doing what.
No more pointing fingers. Right.
Ideally not. You want everyone to know their role. And then, of course, the heart of the SOP is the procedure itself. This is where you have all those detailed step-by-step instructions on how to actually do the task.
Right.
And to finish it off, a well-written SOP will have details about who authorized the procedure, which makes it official, and then a super important part, the revision history.
Okay, the revision history sounds pretty important. Why is it so crucial?
It's basically a logbook of all the changes that have been made.
Hmm.
It tracks the modifications, when they were made, who made them, the whole shebang. And this is really key because it lets you keep the document accurate and up to date. If someone ever asks about a process that was done in the past, you can go back to that specific version of the SOP and see exactly what was done.
That's really helpful.
And it also helps you understand how a procedure has evolved over time and why certain changes were made. It's like a history book for your procedures.
Now let's get back to the lab setting. We know SOPs are essential for both good laboratory practices, GLP, and GMP. What specific activities in the lab are governed by SOPs?
Oh, there are tons of them. Both GLP and GMP require a whole slew of SOPs that cover basically every aspect of how a lab operates.
Wow.
Yeah, this includes SOPs for how you handle equipment and instruments, and then, of course, the detailed procedures for all your test methods.
So let's start with lab equipment. What kind of SOPs would you typically find for that?
Well, for lab equipment, SOPs are there for everything. From the initial design and construction, making sure it's fit for purpose, like 21 CFR Part 111, Section 27A says, all the way to its ongoing maintenance. A really critical part of this is equipment qualification.
Now, I've heard a lot about DQ, IQ, OQ, PQ. Can you break down what each one means and why they're important in SOPs?
Think of it like buying a new car.
Okay.
Design qualification, that's DQ. It's like choosing the right car model with all the features you need. Installation qualification, IQ, is making sure it's delivered and set up correctly. Operational qualification, or OQ, is like testing all the basic functions, do the brakes work, does the steering wheel turn, that kind of stuff.
Makes sense.
And then performance qualification, PQ, is like taking it for a test drive under different conditions to make sure it really meets your needs in the long run.
Right, put it through its paces.
Exactly. In a lab, these stages, DQ, IQ, OQ, PQ, they're all documented in these qualification protocols, and those are often referenced in the equipment's SOPs.
Got it.
This ensures that the equipment's suitable for what you need it for. It's installed properly, it works like it should, and it performs consistently under normal use.
So it's not just about having the equipment, it's about proving it works correctly in your specific lab environment.
That's right. And these qualifications, they're not just a one-time thing. Sometimes equipment needs to be requalified, especially after major repairs, big changes, or even if you move it to a different spot in the lab.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, for example, if you move a really sensitive instrument like an HPLC system, even a little change in the environment can affect how it performs. So you need to requalify it. And the SOP for that piece of equipment would tell you exactly when and how to do that.
Okay, what about the routine maintenance of lab equipment? What role do SOPs play there?
Well, every piece of equipment needs to be calibrated before you use it for the first time. And then you have to calibrate it regularly to make sure it stays accurate and precise. How often you calibrate it, it might depend on what the manufacturer recommends, or it could be based on data from your own lab and experience from the performance qualification. For simpler instruments, like pH meters or balances, they might not go through that whole DQIQ or QPQ process.
Okay.
But you still need to do daily calibration checks, and those need to be documented very carefully.
So a scientist might come in every morning and calibrate their pH meter before they start any experiments.
Exactly. And they document that check according to the SOP to make sure their measurements are reliable for that day. Then you also have SOPs for routine maintenance, cleaning, and sanitizing all the lab equipment. And it's crucial that all of these activities, every calibration, every maintenance task, it's all recorded in the logbooks. That way you have a complete history of how the equipment has been taken care of.
That makes a lot of sense. Now let's move on to test methods. I imagine SOPs for those are incredibly detailed.
Oh, they have to be. The SOP for a test method has to describe every single step of the procedure in such detail that there's no room for interpretation. And according to GMP, these test methods have to be scientifically valid.
Scientifically valid. That sounds really important. What does that mean in practical terms for an SOP?
Well, the actual definition isn't in the main part of the regulations, but the preamble to 21 CFR Part 111 gives us some clues. Basically, a scientifically valid test method has to be proven to reliably and accurately measure what it's supposed to measure. And that proof, it comes from scientific data, published research, or even the company's own research and development. It's all about showing that the method consistently gives you results you can trust.
So it can't just be some random procedure that someone came up with on the spot?
No, not at all. The preamble also says that a good scientific method needs to have certain characteristics. It has to be accurate, meaning the results are close to the true value. And you usually show that through recovery studies. It needs to be precise, which means you get similar results when you repeat the test. We often express that as relative standard deviation, or RSD.
Okay.
Then it has to be specific, meaning it can measure the thing you're interested in without being affected by other stuff in the sample.
Right.
It should also be rugged, which means it gives similar results even if different people do it, or on different equipment, or on different days. And finally, it has to consistently perform like it's supposed to over time.
So that's quite a checklist for a test method to meet. Where do labs typically find these scientifically valid methods to base their SOTs on?
There are a few really well-respected sources. The United States Pharmacopoeia, USP, is a primary resource for a lot of tests used for pharmaceuticals and supplements.
Right.
Then there's AOAC International. They provide a ton of validated analytical test methods. For food-grade chemicals, you'd often use the Food Chemicals Codex, or FCC. And for microbiology, there's the Bacteriological Analytical Manual, BAM. Even agencies like the EPA have validated methods for environmental testing, and those can be relevant too.
So there's no need to reinvent the wheel every time.
Not at all. They can build on what's already out there. But the crucial thing is that they document exactly how they perform that method in their own lab, and that's where the detailed SOP comes in.
So it's about taking that existing knowledge and tailoring it to their specific setting.
Exactly.
What about documenting the actual testing process? How does that tie into SOPs?
Well, just like with using equipment, everything you do in the lab, including testing, has to be documented contemporaneously. That means recording it as it happens, either on paper or in a computer system. The SOP for the test method usually tells you what data to record and how to do it. Then you have these data review processes. Usually, the person who did the test reviews their own data first. Then another qualified analyst does a peer review, and often a supervisor will review it too. Some organizations, especially those that do contract testing, might even have a separate quality assurance review. So you have all these checks to catch any potential errors or inconsistencies.
It's like a system of checks and balances to make sure the data's solid.
Exactly. Multiple sets of eyes on everything. And managing all that data is also governed by SOPs.
Right.
There have to be clear procedures for how you report the data, make sure it's accurate, how you track it, store it securely, and archive it for the required amount of time. For instance, in the dietary supplement industry, you have to keep records about serious adverse events for at least 6 years. That's longer than the general data retention requirements in 21 CFR Part 111.
And what happens if a test result is outside of the expected range?
That triggers what we call an out-of-specification investigation, or OS investigation. And you guessed it, there should be specific SOPs that outline all the steps for dealing with these situations. OS investigations for analytical tests are usually handled differently from those for microbiological tests because the potential problems are different. You also have SOPs for deviations. Those are instances where a procedure wasn't followed exactly as written.
Right.
And then there are SOPs for corrective and preventive actions, or KPA, to figure out the root cause of the problem and prevent it from happening again. And of course, Any changes to documents, including SOPs themselves, have to go through a formal change control and revision control system.
Makes sense.
And all of that is governed by, you guessed it, more SOPs.
So it really is SOPs all the way
It
down.
is. It's important because it ensures that any changes are justified, reviewed, and approved before you actually implement them.
Let's switch gears a bit now and talk about manufacturing. How do SOPs play a role on the production floor?
So in manufacturing, these written procedures, the SOPs, are absolutely crucial for keeping things under control. As subpart F of 21 CFR Part 211 clearly states, these procedures cover everything, from when you first get raw materials all the way through to testing and releasing the final product. It's like a step-by-step roadmap for the entire manufacturing journey.
So every single action, every step involved in making a medicine or a supplement should ideally have an SOP behind it.
That's the goal, yes. In a well-run GMP environment. For example, there will be SOPs that describe exactly how you receive, identify, store, handle, sample, examine, and even test all the materials that are used for packaging and labeling.
Okay.
That's spelled out in 21 CFR 211.122. Paying close attention to detail right from the start helps prevent mistakes later down the line.
Why is there such a strong emphasis on labeling and packaging materials specifically?
Well, if something goes wrong with packaging or labeling, it can have serious consequences, especially for patient safety. You can imagine someone could get the wrong medication because the label was wrong.
Right, that's a good deal.
So SOPs for these operations are designed to prevent mix-ups. They make sure the right labels are on the right products and that the packaging is suitable. That includes things like examining all the packaging and labeling materials before you use them and documenting that in the batch production records. There are also SOPs for inspecting the packaging and labeling areas before you start a production run. This is to make sure there's nothing left over from previous jobs that could lead to a mix-up.
That makes sense. And what about the equipment and machinery used in manufacturing?
You need SOPs to ensure that all the manufacturing equipment and utensils are kept clean and in good condition. This is done through regular cleaning and sanitizing, which is required by 21 CFR Parts 110 and 211.
Okay.
Depending on the product and the equipment, you might have to take things apart for a thorough cleaning, and the SOP would tell you exactly how to do that. It would also tell you what cleaning agents to use and how to make sure everything is actually clean. Then you have SOPs that cover how to properly identify all the containers used for compounding and storage, the processing lines, and all the major pieces of equipment. This is in 21 CFR 211.105, so everyone knows exactly what they're working with at all times.
That seems crucial for preventing mix-ups. Now, what happens if a batch of product doesn't meet the quality standards?
Well, there should be SOPs in place that tell you how to handle that and potentially reprocess the batch. But reprocessing isn't something you just do automatically.
Right.
According to 21 CFR 211.115, any decision to reprocess has to be reviewed and approved by the quality control unit. They need to make sure that the reprocessed batch will meet all the quality standards and that the reprocessing itself is done correctly according to an approved SOP.
So there's a lot of oversight involved. Now, even something as basic as keeping the manufacturing facility clean must have an SOP, right?
Absolutely, you're right. SOPs are really important for maintaining good sanitation in all the buildings used for making, processing, packaging, or storing drug product. You need SOPs for pest control, waste disposal, general cleaning, and maintenance. That's all in 21 CFR 211.56 and 110. Part 110 even gives specific examples, like making sure the grounds around the plant are maintained so nothing that could contaminate the manufacturing areas gets in.
Wow, they really think of everything.
They try to. The main point is that all manufacturing operations, packaging, storage, all of it, has to be done under conditions and controls that minimize the chance of microbial growth and contamination. And those controls are often specified in SOPs. This includes things like carefully monitoring environmental factors, like temperature, humidity, and airflow, all according to the SOPs.
We've talked a lot about what SOPs are and what they cover, both in the lab and in manufacturing. Now, who's in charge of making sure all these documents are in place and kept up to date?
The quality unit, or someone else who's been authorized within the company, they have the main responsibility for approving or rejecting SOPs. They're also responsible for any changes or deviations from the SOPs, and that's highlighted in 21 CFR 111.105. But it's not just about approval. The SOPs also need to clearly say who's responsible for what when it comes to actually following them.
Okay.
That could be different individuals or departments within the organization. And expert guidance like the handbook by Mark Allen Diravize really stresses that.
So it's a shared responsibility, but the quality unit has ultimate oversight.
Precisely. And it's not a static system either. SOPs are living documents. They need to be reviewed and updated regularly.
Makes sense.
That way they stay current, accurate, and reflect the latest best practices and any changes in regulations or the company's processes. And it's super important to properly train everyone on the SOPs that are relevant to their jobs and to make sure they follow them carefully. This is how you minimize errors and keep things consistent.
This all comes back to the need for efficiency in the business, right? Having clear SOPs and actually following them can really help streamline things.
Absolutely. When you have standardized ways of working, you reduce variability, make fewer mistakes, and end up with less rework. That means more efficiency and cost savings, which is a big part of lean manufacturing.
Finally, let's talk about regulatory audits. I'm sure everyone loves those. What role do SOPs play when the inspectors show up?
Well, having clear, well-maintained, and consistently followed SOPs is super important if you want to have a successful audit, whether it's internal, from a customer, or from a regulatory agency like the FDA. Auditors are going to look closely at your SOPs. They want to make sure your processes are in line with the current GMP standards, and they're also looking for any potential problems or gaps in your quality system.
So having good SOPs can make the whole audit process less stressful.
Definitely. When you have well-documented and comprehensive SOPs, it shows the auditors that you have a solid quality management system in place. It tells them you understand your processes and how to control them. And having established SOPs for how you handle corrective actions that might come up during the audit is also really important. The main goal of a GMP audit is to assess how well your quality management system is working and whether you have a strong culture of quality within your organization.
Right.
And that culture relies heavily on having well-defined SOPs that are actually used.
All right, so let's recap everything we've talked about. What are the key takeaways from our deep dive into standard operating procedures?
The big thing to remember is that SOPs are the foundation for GMP compliance in the pharmaceutical and dietary supplement industries.
Yeah, they're essential.
They're crucial for standardizing operations, ensuring product quality, and making sure you're following all the regulations throughout the life cycle of a product, from the raw materials to the final release and beyond.
And for our listeners out there who are always trying to learn more about these important industries, understanding the life cycle and the importance of SOPs gives you a real leg up. It helps you make sense of these complex and highly regulated areas that directly affect our health and well-being.
Absolutely. And thinking about the future, with technology constantly evolving and the introduction of new manufacturing techniques like continuous manufacturing and automation in the pharmaceutical industry, how do you think SOPs will need to adapt? Can they still ensure those core principles of quality and consistency are maintained? What new challenges and opportunities will these advancements bring for the blueprints of GMP?
That's a really interesting question to consider. It highlights how important clear instructions and standardization are, much like what SOPs provide. And that's not just in the pharmaceutical industry, it's in any field. Having well-defined procedures can really make a difference in any endeavor. They help ensure good outcomes and minimize errors, so it's something worth thinking about no matter what you do.